So now finally, we talk about the uterine cycle. After all is said and done, it took us forever to get here. So the uterine cycle, it's also called the menstrual cycle. So the uterine cycle is going to be the cyclic changes that happen to that endometrial lining. This is going to be mainly because of estrogen and progesterone levels. There are going to be 3 different phases: menstrual, proliferative, and secretory. And it is going to be highly regulated by what's happening in the ovaries. Again, we talked about it, right? We talked about how the follicles are secreting estrogen, the corpus luteum is secreting progesterone. These are going to target the uterus, and now we will talk about how. So again, it's that 28-day uterine cycle. It can be anywhere between 21 to 35 days. No female is perfect, or some are, but it's very rare. So the proliferative phase, when it does vary, the proliferative phase is going to be the one that varies the most, or the menstrual cycle. Usually, females will ovulate 14 days before menstruation occurs. So secretory phase is typically going to be 14 days. So if anything is going to change, it's going to be either you're menstruating longer or the proliferative phase is going to be a little bit longer. So let's take a look at it. So we're going to start with that menstrual phase. The menstrual phase can be anywhere from day 1 to 5. Sometimes it's day 1 to 7. Again, this is going to differ from female to female. It can be as little as 3 days. What happens is that these little arteries here, you can kind of see them. This is the uterine. I really like this picture because this is the uterine lining right here. But you can see the arteries. So what happens early on, before menstruation ever occurs, is these little arteries are going to constrict. And they are going to, because they constrict, the tissue here is going to die because they're not giving any more blood to that tissue. That is really what you're sloughing off, is going to be that dead tissue layer, that the functional layer is no longer getting any kind of nutrients that it needs. So you are going to slough off that functional layer. So you have a couple of different, so menstruation is going to be the actual process of shedding that uterine lining. The menses is going to be the lining that is shed, or it can also be called period. A lot of people know that word as well. And menarche is going to be the very first menstrual cycle, the very first menses a female has. And again, this can start anywhere between 11 and 13. So females, we'll go through puberty later on, and we'll talk about how females will kind of go through pre-puberty, and then they will start menstruation about a year or 2 after that whole process. So next, what's happening is about day 6 to about day 14 is going to be the proliferative phase. So if you remember, what's been happening here is that that follicle, you start out with a primary, and then you get to that secondary, and then over here, you are going to have that big, giant tertiary here. And remember that the bigger the follicle, the more estrogen is being secreted. And you can see it by this nice little chart right here. So estrogen is going to go in and target the uterine lining. Its main function is that we need to build this back up. We just got rid of this entire functional layer, as you can see. Now it's time to build it. That's where proliferative comes in. That's where its name comes from. You were going to proliferate this. This is going to be a time for tissue growth and repair and things like that. So we have to go in and build this lining back up, and we have to go in and build these arteries back up as well. So more vascularization. That's where it gets its name. So, and that's exactly what's happening here. The last part is going to be the secretory phase. So again, if we go back to that whole chart here, I really like it. I should have put it on the other one. This, right after ovulation, this is going to be that secretory phase right in here. So remember, this is where we have that corpus luteum that comes about, and it is secreting progesterone. You can see it. Here's the spike of progesterone. We still have a little estrogen being secreted, But what progesterone does is it is going to target these glands right in here, these secretory glands. That's why it's called the secretory phase. So what it's doing is it's getting ready for that that oocyte. So actually, it's already ready. I'm sorry. This is getting ready for implantation right here. It's kind of building a nice little blanket for the if fertilization occurs, then that nice little pre-embryo has a nice little blanket to snuggle into, because we'll talk about how if we don't have a nice thick uterine lining, then we don't have anything for that little pre-embryo to implant into. But if implantation occurs, it's going to be right in here at the peak of our progesterone levels. And that means that we need to make sure that we can feed this little pre-embryo because it doesn't have a placenta yet. So here are these secretory glands that are secreting this nourishment for our little pre-embryo if it actually has implanted here. So also there's that more vascularization as well. So we'll get into that later on when we get into growth and development and talk about why we need this whole process to happen. So if fertilization doesn't occur, remember, there goes the corpus luteum, there goes progesterone. Without progesterone, we are going to start that whole cycle again, and that's what causes the menstruation to occur, is that drop, that drastic drop in progesterone, because it knows that nothing is gestating. We have to do this whole process again of building up, getting rid of that old lining because it didn't happen, and building up a new lining for a new pre-embryo, hopefully a new pre-embryo. So if we take a look and see, this is the chart put together. So we looked at this, we saw this chart separated. Here's the ovarian cycle, and here is that uterine cycle here. Well, specifically, this is the ovarian cycle and this is the uterine cycle, but it's showing the hormones that go along with it. And this is a great depiction on how these are going to be controlled together. So the menstrual cycle and the proliferative phase, so the menstrual phase and the proliferative phase are going to occur during the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. Once ovulation occurs, that is also going to occur. Ovulation occurs during the proliferative phase as well. And then after ovulation, secretory is going to begin, and that's going to occur during the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. So this is a nice little chart that's putting it all together here. So what it's going through is it's going through days 1 through 5. It's showing you what's happening to the follicles, how it's going through that whole process of building up, and showing you what's happening to those estrogen levels because the follicles are getting bigger. And it's showing you how that is going to affect, of course, it's going through that whole menstrual cycle as well. And then, of course, we go on to days 6 through 12. Again, here is what's happening to the follicles. It goes from the secondary to the vesicular follicle here. It's showing what's happening with FSH and LH levels. I'm not sure why they're not here on the days 1 through 5. But then it's showing you how those estrogen levels spike, and it's showing you how that functional layer is being built because of the estrogen. And it's also showing you that nice little negative feedback loop that's happening over off to the side. If we go down here, if we go down, so it's going down this way to C. Here's ovulation. It's showing us how we have that huge spike in estrogen, which causes that huge spike in LH. And that is, of course, going to cause ovulation. It's showing you what's happening there in the uterine cycle, still proliferating. And then, of course, we're going to move this way, and it is showing what's happening at the very end of the cycle. How here's that corpus luteum and the corpus albicans eventually, and it's also showing how it will inhibit the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, but it's also showing those spike in estrogen levels, and it's showing those secretory glands, what's happening in the uterine cycle. So this is a nice little chart putting it all together. I wish I could just, pop this, bring it over and talk about this way early on. So females, very complicated, right? So everybody thought, oh, we just have one cycle. No, actually you have two different cycles that's happening there. You have the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle, but they are tied closely together. Again, if things don't go right in the ovary, it's going to completely screw up what's happening in the uterus. So, and of course, that is all governed by hormones. So speaking of hormones, here they are. This is going to tell you the different hormones. It's telling you the effects as well, where they are secreted from. So this is a nice little chart that's kind of summing it all up and talking about, of course, their importance to the ovarian as well as the uterine cycle. We'll talk more about estrogen because estrogen is a lot more than just target the uterine growth and proliferative phase. We're going to talk about how it's involved in the sexual characteristics that happen at puberty and different. It also is going to have effects on breast development. And then in progesterone, we'll talk more about that as well whenever we get into the next chapter.